Howdy, Joe DeSanto here. Thank you for joining me in this video. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to generate your 1099s for your vendors in QuickBooks, or QuickBooks Online specifically, I should say. I have to admit, QBO makes this process pretty darn easy. However, you do have to know kind of what you're doing so you don't underreport or miss some stuff. So there's definitely a few things to pay attention to here, and of course I'm going to go through those. Also, quickly before we get into the video, if you like my content, please do the old like and subscribe. That really helps me out. All right, so here we go. I'm just going to minimize myself down to a tiny circle here, and we're going to get started. All right, so I'm in QuickBooks here, and QuickBooks, I will say this, it kind of assumes that you've been dotting your I's and crossing your T's a little bit when you go into this process. So if you haven't done good data entry and tagged things for 1099 properly, you can have some issues. So I'll talk a little bit about that and explain what I mean. But if you want to do your 1099s in QuickBooks Online, and if you're using QuickBooks Online, you may as well because it's really easy, or as easy as 1099s can be. Over here in the menu, you're going to go to taxes, and you're going to hit 1099 filings. When you do that, you're going to end up here. And there's two options. It says let QuickBooks prepare for me, and that's a little bit more money, and use QuickBooks to prep my own. This is kind of the way it's been in historic years. I'm using this, one, because it's cheaper, but two, I don't like QuickBooks to do a lot of things on its own. It's a good software, and it's probably as good as it gets, regarding AI and automation right now. But there's just so many things it gets wrong when it does stuff on its own, and it really can, screw you up. So I like to have a bit of manual oversight. Hopefully someday, AI is so good that it can just do all your accounting. You don't have to do anything. I mean, I guess that would, reduce my workload, which may or may not be good, but we're not there yet, and you got to get this right. So I do that. But if you want to look at the comparison here, what the difference is, it recommends a list of vendors who appear to need 1099. Actually, that could help you if what it recommends is thorough and correct. But I'm going to show you how to kind of think about that on your own. Scan and filter a list of payments and reports on 1099s. I don't know, it's sort of going to do that anyway. And it pre-fills out editable 1099 forms. I don't think you necessarily need that. I haven't, but maybe in some cases you would. But in any case, I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to hit try it out. Okay, and the first thing it's going to do is bring up your company info and ask you to just verify it's right. Name, email, contact for you, address, and EIN, of course. I blurred that out. And then we start. And then we get to this page here, and basically, if you haven't done 1099s before, this probably will be, empty, and you're going to need to populate it. And you would do that by going over here and selecting accounts. And essentially what you're doing here is, you have your chart of accounts, and particularly, for the purpose of 1099s, your expense accounts. We're basically selecting accounts for QuickBooks to look at to gather potential 1099 recipient information. So, like, for example, we have like subcontractors, and we put them in a category, say, called subcontractors. Certainly you would select that for Quicken to look at. Now, I tend to just kind of be overcautious and have Quicken look at most expense categories. But some of them I know, like state taxes, they're not going to get a 1099. But anything that I may have paid a person or a company and would get a 1099, I'll check. I've checked a bunch here. Now, in regards to who gets a 1099, that's part of this process. The general rules are, if you are a corporation, company ending in INC, we don't need to send you a 1099, whether you're a C Corp or an S Corp. If you're an INC, we don't need to send you a 1099. If you're an LLC, but your tax says an S Corp or a C Corp, we don't need to send you a 1099. or I guess I should say in the context of this video, you don't need to send that recipient a 1099 if that's what their W-9 says. If they're an LLC that is a disregarded entity or single member LLC or taxed as a partnership, they do get a 1099. And then, of course, anyone that's a person's name and social security number that essentially is a sole proprietor, they get a 1099. And to put that in better context, here's an example W-9 that you would get that you need to get from every vendor. And they're going to have their name, and then here they're going to have their tax status selection. So right here, this would be an LLC partnership. They get a 1099. But if this said C Corp, they would not get a 1099. If the vendor put, S Corp in here, no 1099. If they were a C Corp or an S Corp, in general, they would not get a 1099. So if this is checked and it's a partnership, 1099, or if this individual sole proprietor is checked, it's 1099. Now, don't get thrown off. If someone's an individual sole proprietor, but they have a tax ID, that doesn't change anything. They still get a 1099. They're either going to get it to their tax ID or their social security number, whichever they're using. So that's that. Now, the other thing about 1099s is mostly for the average, person these days, you're either going to send a 1099 miscellaneous or a 1099 NEC for non-employee compensation. For miscellaneous, there's a few things that would qualify for miscellaneous. So if you pay your rent to someone and you have their W-9 and they're supposed to get a 1099, they're going to get a 1099 miscellaneous with monies in the rents box. The other most common 1099 miscellaneous is legal. Lawyers get a 1099 miscellaneous. Let's see if I have legal in here anywhere. Oh, it's right there. There we go. 1099, you select this box and you're going to go gross proceeds paid to attorney. Right there. Other than that, you can see here in this list of like the other things that might get miscellaneous, direct sales, royalties, federal tax, blah, blah, blah. Most of these for your average small business sending out 1099s for contractors, it's doesn't apply. You're going to see attorney, you're going to see rent, and then otherwise it's very likely just going to be non-employee compensation. Now, remember, non-employee compensation is like compensation to a person or a company that qualifies for a 1099 that's not an employee, right? So more often than not, if you're paying a person to do something, you're most likely definitely going to be in a 1099. But sometimes they're incorporated as a consultant with an S Corp, in which case you don't. If you have hired a company, I don't know, to do computer stuff, fix your computers, you got to get a W-9 from them, and if they need a 1099, you got to send it. They're required by law to give you their W-9, by the way. Some people either fail to do that out of, I don't know, just laziness, or they kind of think if they don't give it to you, you're not going to report their income, and maybe they can squeak away without that. Whether or not they get the 1099, they have to report their income, that's for sure. But the 1099 purpose is really to alert the government that they made money. Some vendors will call you and be like, I need my 1099, otherwise I have no idea how much money I made. They use their 1099s as a way to add up their income. Not a very sound way to make sure you're reporting all your income, to be honest. Okay, the other crazy caveats of the 1099 are, regardless of whether they get a 1099, if you paid any of those people with a credit card, you don't have to send them a 1099. If you paid them with PayPal and they're using a business PayPal account, you don't have to send them a 1099. In that case, the credit card or PayPal is supposed to send them the 1099. If you pay them with your bank account or Venmo or Zelle, all those funds have to be issued a 1099. To further confuse it, if you happen to pay them half with a credit card and half from your bank, you're only supposed to give them a 1099 for the amount of money that went out of your bank account. QuickBooks helps you sort of figure this out. If they see a vendor that's supposed to get a 1099 and they see half of their payments for a credit card, QuickBooks will automatically not calculate that in. So it's kind of handy. Now, over here, you're going to see that you can run a report for accounts used to pay 1099s or run a report for all vendor payments. And this is a way for you to kind of test, what potential am I seeing? Ultimately, you're only going to send 1099s to people that require them, right? That you've paid with your bank account. But how does QuickBooks know if they require it or not? Well, you have to get their W-9. You have to look at it. You have to determine if they deserve one. Wrong word. And then in their vendor page, in their setup, you would have their name, their email. You have to have their email now because QuickBooks is only doing e-file. So they only get an email. They don't get a paper copy. You can download all the PDF versions right after you do it, save them. Half of the vendors are going to email you on February 28th and be like, I need my 1099. And then you can just mail it to them. As much as it's annoying, it's just easier to download them and mail it to them. Put in their address. I always save their W-9 here in the attachment. And then the most important thing is you have to tell QuickBooks, track this vendor for 1099s. If you don't check this, it won't populate in the basic 1099 list, even if they're supposed to get one. Of course, you also need to put in their tax ID so that QuickBooks, knows what tax ID to associate the income to when reporting to the IRS. Now, I do this throughout the year. I don't pay any vendors unless I have a 1099, period. I just don't do it because it makes the end of the year so much more difficult. I'd rather get this info in throughout the year and make sure I'm checking this box. If sometimes a client of mine goes and pays someone and then the transaction comes through QuickBooks and I don't have a W-9, I'll just set them up as a vendor, but I'll always check this box, even if I don't have the info, so later on down the road here, it'll pop up. So that's about putting it in there. Now, we've told QuickBooks, hey, these are the accounts, the expense accounts I want you to look at for potential 1099ers. We know that the box has to be checked, blah, blah, blah. So if we move to the next step here, we're going to get all the vendors that have the 1099 box checked that meet the $600 1099 threshold that have been paid with a bank account versus a credit card or PayPal. QuickBooks sort of populates that for you. Now, in this case, we can see here, this person, I don't have their information in, for whatever reason. So I could go back to their vendor here and I can populate it based on the W-9. And yes, if you don't have the W-9, you got to go email them now and you got to get it so you can populate this. Or if you have the W-9 handy, you can edit the info right here. You can fill in, follow the steps. We'll say an individual, it'll ask for their info, and then you can hit save and you can move on. Now, if you don't have all the info in, but you do have one 1099 or however many that are good, you can hit next. You can review the forms. You can process those 1099s. It's a couple more screens, but honestly, I've already done it, so that's why it's not giving me any more checks, but it's just a couple more buttons. Those 1099s will go out. You can download them, but then you can go right through this process again, and it'll only allow you to send out 1099s for people that haven't gotten them already. So it's kind of smart in that it knows what you've done, and it won't allow you to send out a duplicate 1099. Then over here, you can review the summary, which this is not really that helpful. But if you go back to the 1099 area, let's see here. The front page is going to have all the 1099s you sent out, and you can hit a download, and it'll automatically download all the PDFs for you. Now, if you process a bunch, download the PDFs, then you add a bunch more in, and you go download PDFs, it's going to download all of them again. So just FYI. But it's pretty smart. Now, you might be saying, hey, Joe, liking this. This is making a lot of sense now that you're explaining it, but I didn't know all this before all year long while I was paying people. I wasn't hitting the checkbox. I don't know, like, how many people I've paid. And I'll tell you what, that is just, a difficult deal. But that's kind of why this is here. It says run report of all vendor payments, okay? So you could click this, and it's basically going to do a report of everybody you paid that is a setup vendor with either a company name or a person's name in Quicken. And it's going to give you a total of what you sent them. You could export this to Excel, and then you could fish through there and say, I know this is a person, I know this is a person, I know, and also you could sort, you could kind of remove everybody you paid with a credit card and only reduce it down to bank account, and then kind of figure out from there, and then go get the W-9s and then go set them up correctly. So, but that's a real pain in the butt to do at the end of the year, when you're 8 days before the deadline. So that's why you really want to get W-9s throughout the year. Like I said, and it's hard to get W-9s from people after the fact often because they're just lazy, they don't want to fill it out. But if you say to them, I'm not going to pay you until I get your W-9, well, that's a motivation for them to fill it out and email it to you and go, great, you can pay me now. So that's how you do the 1099s. Now, it's going to say, there's going to be a part where it says the federal and state requirements are met. If they haven't been met, and if you have 1099s for states all over the place, there are a few states that make you send in like a paper submission of your 1099s for those state recipients. You might have to do a little, in QuickBooks will kind of alert you if any of that's the case. Most states, they'll just take what you're supplying to the Fed and you can electronically submit it to the state. And let's just hope your 1099s do that. But if not, you might have a little bit of manual work to do. Let's hope not. After that, you hit next and you'll pay. It'll just pick the same payment that your QuickBooks is being paid with, or you can enter in a different one. It's pretty cheap. It's like $6 per 1099. And it just shoots them out. And then again, in that summary page, you can download a copy for yourself. I always download a copy of all 1099s sent out. We send that to our CPA so they have a copy of it. Because the thing is, if you're taking it as a business deduction and that person or entity was supposed to get a 1099, if you don't send it to them, one, you're not fulfilling your obligation for the IRS in terms of them getting, being aware of people's income. But you might make it, if you were to get audited and you don't have the 1099, that could get challenged as a deduction, So you really want to do it. And there are penalties if you don't send 1099s and all that. So, if you miss the deadline, you're certainly not the only person, that's for sure. As long as you get it to them, as soon as you can, I would say. Of course, my recommendation is get it done by the deadline. But a lot of times you're going to get W-9s and people aren't sending them, so you do your best. All right. Hopefully that helped you. I will see you in the next video. Bye.